diverse voices in the energy revolution. Here's your host, Amy Simpkins.
Welcome back to the Power Flow podcast for another episode. I am your host, Amy Simpkins, and I am here today talking to Una Nowling. Ms. Una Nowling is a project manager and the technology leader for fuels, risk, and reliability at Black & Veatch. She assists utilities and energy companies with decarbonization and efficiency improvement studies, fossil fuel to renewable energy conversion projects, environmental compliance and pollution reduction, research and development for the Electric Power Research Institute, National Energy Technology Laboratories, and others, and conducts technical and scientific training on various topics, as well as human resources training on gender equity and LGBTQIA+ equity in STEM. Ms. Nowling has managed more than 200 projects in her 28-year career at Black & Veatch and is also an adjunct professor of mechanical engineering at the University of Missouri, Kansas City campus. Ms. Nowling is a frequent technical author and a radio producer of 2 weekly social justice programs on Kansas City Public Radio. Una, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much for having me on, Amy. Really glad that I could be here and have an opportunity to talk to you and your audience.
Me as well. And so I love your bio, and it is so comprehensive. You have worked on so many different things. I'm curious, kind of where you're focused right now. What's your favorite thing to work on right at the moment?
Right now, my favorite thing to work on is renewable energy, decarbonization. It is taking everything that I have learned from the decades, really, that I've spent working with in the fossil industry and figuring out not only how can we transition to a green future by many different methods, but also this isn't going to happen overnight. I think that's one of the critical things. There's going to be a transition period during which we are going to have fossil plants running for possibly longer than many people think they will, to provide that grid stability because of the limitations of storage capacity for renewable energy at this point in time, because of the unmet expectations of the physical rollout of renewable energy. These fossil plants are going to be around, I think, for until after my retirement. So how can we make them better? How can the ones that have to remain as we make this transition, how can we continue to make them better, make them cleaner, more reliable, safer, and most of all, be able to support the best way that they possibly can our decarbonized future? And so it's essentially taking everything I learned about keeping the plants going and flipping the script, so to speak, and saying, how do I take that knowledge and adapt?
Awesome. So normally when we're thinking about this transition from fossil fuels to renewables, it often goes hand in hand with a conversation about shifting from centralized architectures to distributed architectures. And obviously, you're talking about the fossil fuel based generation staying in play for a long time. And that lends itself to more of a centralized architecture. What's your opinion about kind of the way that we should or could be rolling out renewable energy? Is it more of a front of meter or behind the meter play?
Well, that is a really interesting question. And I think that decentralization does have a tremendous number of advantages in terms of strengthening the grid, and in some cases can accelerate the decarbonization pathway. But there has been a lack of investment in infrastructure at many levels throughout our electricity generation, distribution, and grid system, that limit us. Black and Veatch did a study a few years ago that looked at what would be the impacts if half of all the automobiles in the Kansas City area were replaced with full EVs. What would be the actual impact right down to the neighborhood level? And we found that there were significant upgrades that would take decades to fully manifest, to getting all of the network restructured just to handle that additional load at night from, say, 40 additional EVs plugged in at night to charge. You have to upgrade the lines to the houses through the local neighborhoods. You have to change the whole structure just for that level of switch. And so a green future I think that there will be a decentralization. I think, again, it will be a gradual transition. I don't think revolution works well in terms of stability and having a really secure path to a decarbonized future. Believe me, when your power's out for more than 5 minutes, people are calling like mad or using their phones to check when will it be back on, when will it be back on. Stability of the power system in the U.S. is something we very much take for granted. Whereas when I work in India, it's shocking at first, but eventually you do get used to having the power go out several times during the day. You get accustomed to being in an elevator and having it stop and the lights go out, and you just take out your phone and start playing Sudoku and wait because it will come back on. And it's no big deal. But that doesn't mean that that's the way it should be, however.
I love that. And I think in my own work, I've experienced sort of the same thing about Americans in general. We expect that you flip the light switch and the lights come on. And how much is that a product of where we've come from? And yet, as we expect the light switch to go on and the lights come on, we also, as a culture, don't understand where our power comes from. Like, it just comes from that light switch, right? I mean, it's a sophisticated person that knows where the utility feed comes into their house. I mean, and
it becomes more vital as we switch to a work from home strategy. If even just 25% of the American workforce is now working from home permanently, having reliable power at home is really a necessity, whereas some buildings, some corporations, they get preferential feed from the utilities. Some have backup immediate generation at home. You may not have that luxury. So decentralization and use of microgrid technology could help provide more stability for the workforce in general, especially as we are moving out of a centralized corporate structure to work from home, work from virtually anywhere type of alternative.
I think that's a really fascinating observation. I haven't heard anyone talking about that side of the impact of going, from an office to work from home, that, it changes the way that we are using energy. Instead of collectively, it becomes more individual, the backup issues. Like, that's a really fascinating take on the situation.
And another interesting thing, too, that impacts is that there's many. I sat down and brainstormed one time recently just because I was bored about what are some of the mega or mini trends that could come about if, say, half the people in the workforce are working from home. Home HVAC systems generally are not as efficient per square foot as packing everyone in an office. At the same time, vehicle miles on the road decrease. Will there be a surplus of used cars available for purchase as people find they don't need so many cars anymore because 2 or more wage earners are working from home? What is going to be the impact on the power demands of internet as more people demand high-speed internet? That does take much more power requirement if everyone on your entire block is at gigabit level. There's even little mini trends you can come up with just off the top of your head. Like, I predict dog ownership will increase because more people will be at home willing to take the time to raise dogs. People don't like cage training dogs or locking them up all day or having to run home at lunch to let them out. But if you're working from home, it's not as big of a deal. There's predictions I've seen that the size of the average American home may increase by another 800 to 1,000 square feet for new build homes, because now it's expected there will be at a minimum 1 to 2 wage earners who want a home office. I don't have a home office. This home was built 61 years ago and it's tiny. I have to work out of a chair. I really wish that I could upsize. So I think that taking all these things into account, the transition to a green future has to also consider that we may lose some energy efficiency due to the change in workplace habits. And is there a way we can recoup that? Or is there a way that we can be smarter about the way we utilize energy or store it or generate it that can account for some of the potential lost efficiencies?
That sounds like some amazing research. I would love to see that happen. I don't know if anyone out there is working on that at the lab level or the university level, but yeah, that's amazing. We think in the industry, we always talk about kind of the impacts of centralized architecture versus distributed architecture, and of course all the hybrid, models that are sort of in between on that spectrum as well. But centralization versus decentralization, or let's call it centralization versus distribution, is more than just power, right?
Yeah. Absolutely. And there is a lot of privilege involved in this too. For instance, just to be blunt, as an experienced engineer and project manager in the field, I make good money. That's not a secret. So when, say, we had our house siding redone, I paid an awful lot extra for the maximum amount of insulation possible on every wall, on the roof, everywhere. Every energy efficiency upgrade that could be done, I checked the box off on, even though my own spreadsheet calcs showed there was no payback period because the cost of electricity was so cheap. Literally, the payback period was past the end of my life. So why do it? Because I wanted to be more efficient, and I had the privilege to do that. But many people don't have that privilege. They live in apartments or condos. They don't get to control efficiency upgrades and the efficiency of the space they live and will end up working in. So that's another important factor to consider, is efficiency standards for multifamily or multi-unit housing as well.
So let's shift a little bit. I want to talk more about you personally. You in your bio mentioned you have a 28-year career at Black & Veatch. Have you always worked in the context of energy and utilities?
I worked for a very short time as a mechanical design engineer at a company that made steel garage doors, designing machines that helped manufacture the doors. So I did that as an internship twice, and then worked as an engineer for about 4 or 5 months. And that was fun, but wow, it was not fulfilling in many ways. And I had always had an interest in energy all of my life, but amazingly, I did not go to university to be an engineer. I went to university wanting to be a writer, and a writer or a historian. But frankly, it came down to the stark economics. My family was not wealthy. I believe I am the first person in my entire family tree to have graduated from college at all. And we needed the money. And it came down to, what areas can I study? I have the best prospect for jobs and sound interesting. And I said, well, engineering sounds a little interesting, but I don't know a lot about it. No one ever really told me that much about what you really do. And as I worked with it and made it through the required courses and got into the heat transfer thermodynamic courses, I said, this is really fascinating, where energy comes from, where how energy moves through the universe. The whole concept of the universe being energy and matter, which are two phases of essentially the same thing, was incredible. And later on, it became almost a metaphysical or spiritual thing. As a Shakti Hindu, Shakti is essentially based upon energy of the universe. And so it flowed very well with it. It just sort of all came together that's what interested me the most. However, we were in a bit of a economic depression, mini depression at the time. So I took the job that was available, and I did good work at it. But when Black and Veatch offered me a job, I said, yes, yes. And they originally said I would be programming microcontrollers to interface with power plants and so forth. And on my first day of the job, I was told, well, that project fell through, so we don't really know what to do with you. We're going to stick you in the fuels group. And we think they need some work. And that's essentially where I stayed and now lead after 28 years. And the fuels group was formed in effect to respond to the Clean Air Act amendments of 1990, which effectively gave coal power stations in the United States two choices: switch to a cleaner coal, which was typically very different from their design fuel, or add emissions upgrades, or a combination of both. And coal power, it's not at all like anything else you can imagine. And bioenergy, which is my big focus now, is even more crazy at times. You know, if you take your car, for example, and you drive to BP one week and 7-Eleven the next week and some other gas station the third week, basically it runs the same. You might think that it runs differently, but most people can't. You know, you're a totally subjective sample size of one. You don't really know if it runs that much better or worse. But a coal power plant is designed for a rather narrow specification of coal. And coal comes in a tremendous variety of specifications, such that it's not just a matter of can it run efficiently or not. In many cases, you can't physically or legally, that is environmentally, run it at all on one coal versus another. And there were so many subtleties involved in it that it fascinated me. There were so many dimensions to the problem. There are thousands of variables when you dig into it that you have to consider to make the plant run efficiently with the least amount of environmental impact, and also find a solution, solve a problem that convinces the plant owner this path forward not only saves you money, but helps the environment. Where is the downside? And I guess it was really the fact about engineering in general, why it drew me, is that you're solving problems from some standpoint or another. You are helping people out. I mean, obviously, if somebody wanted me to build a laser to destroy the moon, I would turn them down, even though that's technically solving a problem. But really, I want to work on things that benefit humanity. I want to work on, and I will pursue projects that have strong positive environmental impact very aggressively, even nonprofit effectively if I have to, because I just want to do them so badly. I want to be part of the solution and somebody who makes the world better. And at the same time, though, I continued my writing, which I never pursued in college, as a side job, and moonlit, I don't know what the proper phrase is, for about 14 years at a major syndicated newspaper as a ghostwriter for a Q&A column. And I learned how to write actually rather well and made a nice amount of money from my side gig. And I learned how to present via my job, which led to the fact that when I started to be interviewed on the radio, people said, you come fully prepared, you speak very fluidly, you can answer any question. Would you like to have a radio show of your own? And it all kind of came together. My urge to write and to tell stories, my urge to have the ability to tell stories and communicate, and my desire and passion to try to solve problems, especially involving energy and the environment. I really feel sometimes like I'm the luckiest woman in the world for where I am right now in everything that I do. I love my job. Yet the hours are long sometimes. And sometimes you're sleeping overnight in an airport or something like that. But generally speaking, I really do love what I do.
I love so many aspects of that story. Thank you so much for sharing your own personal experience. One of the things that jumped out at me there was just that the way that our culture normally has these stovepipes, right? Around like, well, that's science. That can't be spirituality, because science and spirituality are two different things. And you're like, hey, look, we're talking about the transfer of energy through the universe here. And then, this spiritual path is all about how energy flows, right? And it really is related. And then I see the same thing, the same pattern in your story of like writing and engineering, where it's not a stovepipe of like, oh, you're a writer, or, oh, you're an engineer and a problem solver, that like those two things go together in the way that you're bringing to the table that, problem solving, I won't say is nothing, but problem solving is greatly enhanced by being able to communicate, by being able to gather information from people, by being able to get buy-in from people. And so all of that, I think it's beautiful to see the way has come together for you and continues to come together for you so that you get to show up to work as a whole person.
I heard so many people in college say, why are we taking Comp 1 or 2? We're going to be engineers. We don't need to learn how to write. It's like, oh my goodness, no. You need to be able to sell your story. And I don't mean sell from the marketing or commercial side. You need to be able to convince people that not only have I developed a good solution, but it is one that you need to seriously consider. And when you're at the end of it all, you have to put passion. That's a thing that I've been told by many of my long-term clients. They've said, one of them said they just loved reading my final reports that I would do for their power plant because I write almost like it's an adventure. I don't mean it's not literally that way, but there's different ways that you can present things. I took a band of steely-eyed engineers and we came out to your plant and we tackled this problem and we faced these challenges, and alongside your hardworking personnel there, we kicked its butt, and at the end of the day we all raised our beer mugs high and toasted each other and went on to further battles. And you have to have passion, and you have to be able to convey that passion in a positive way to the people that you work with, to the people that you work with at work, to clients if you're a consultant, especially to the young ones that you're training. That's something that I really try to spend a lot of time working with interns and new hires, is trying to convince them that, yes, this is the worst possible thing in your life is that you'll come in at 8, you'll sit down and be a zombie for 8 hours and then go home at 5 and not even care about it. I said, I want you to be so proud of your job that you brag about it to your friends. Your friends talk about the jobs, and you're like, oh, no, honey, let me tell you what I'm doing, because I am awesome. And this is what I do. I said, wouldn't that be great if you could feel so good about the work you do that you brag about it? There are some mornings on some projects that I wake up in the morning and one of my first thoughts is, all right, I get to work on this today.
Yeah. And I love that connection to narrative. Humans are motivated by narrative, inspired by narrative. And I think narrative is a way to connect in our day-to-day jobs, the way that we talk to clients. It's a way to inspire the next generation. And I think it's part of the way that we move forward into this new clean energy future is we have to be telling stories.
And we have to be
weaving
open-minded,
narratives,
flexible too. We have to be able to go with the flow when required, but we also need to know when to cut away from the herd and pursue a new path if that is really going to be the better way. You have to know really how to find innovative solutions, not get trapped in the same old, but also look back to the past and learn those lessons so you don't make the same mistakes again. I try to tell my team, mistakes are great. They teach you how to do things better, but just try not to make the same mistake more than twice, or 3 times, maybe if it's a really bad day or something.
I love the grace of making the mistake 2 or 3 times. That's a lot of grace. I've received that. We're going to take a quick break here. And when we come back, I have a couple of more technical questions before we dream big about the future. Back here on the Power Flow podcast. Today we're talking to Una Nowling about fuels, about decarbonization and the advancement of renewable energy. And I wanted to go back really quick to what we were talking about before the break. Technically speaking, when you were talking about coal, that is I had no idea that there are different types of coal. And that they have different properties and they're different actual fuel types. I think what jumped out to me while you were talking about that is that I think a lot of us, especially working on renewables, tend to demonize coal while not knowing a lot about it.
Well, it is true. And, I am so invested in the research and study of coal and ways to use it that one of my nicknames from some of the people that I lead is the coal goddess, which I think is kind of cool because I know so much about it. But coal is an incredibly variable fuel. You can have coals that range from anthracites that produce practically no ash that are suitable for home heating and cooking in your stove to lignites that are 50 to 60% rock and water, essentially, by weight. And in some cases, getting close to 70%. I mean, literally 70% of what's going to that furnace has already been burned, and yet it will work. And the minerals contained within it have a tremendous impact on the pollutants that are produced. I mean, it is a sedimentary rock. Anything that's in the ground could be in it. And people think of sulfur right away and acid rain, and they think of the nitrogen and, again, acid rain and ozone. But you could have mercury, uranium, you could have all sorts of strange and unusual elements. Then power plants can be so sensitive that literally a plant could be designed for a coal from one mine, and then a mine that's working the same coal seam a mile away may produce a coal that the plant can't even burn, that it can't even start up on. And it was that variation that really attracted me because it was so cool. All the different things you had to take into account. It was a gigantic pattern in front of you, or a mosaic of how do you find the path that you can convince the plant owner not only is this path saving you money, but it's making everything better for everyone. Less air emissions, less toxic emissions to the watershed, you're improving safety. How can we make things better? And bioenergy, which is my big kick right now, as variable as coal is, bioenergy is a full factor of 10 times that in terms of variation. If you think about burning trees, like I'm managing a project that's looking to convert 2 coal plants completely to burn a specific species of tree in the Caribbean. In fact, I just kicked off another project that I have goosebumps over practically, to convert another power plant fully to another specific type of tree that will be harvested in, the only thing I can say is, the Southern Hemisphere. I love these projects because the properties of the fuel of a tree change, not only if you think about the bark versus the leaves and the twigs and the heartwood versus the sapwood, but over the age. We found in one case, if you harvested the trees and these sustainable plantations at 4 to 6 years, it made a significant difference in performance than if you harvested between 7 to 10 years. And do you use the bark? Do you not use the bark? Do you use the small stems and leaves, or do you have to find a different use for them? Everything, and we're just talking about one species of tree, and the next island over, that same species of tree is soaking up more chlorides from the soil and the water being closer to the actual ocean itself, and thus it's going to have higher corrosion rates. And you have to take all these factors into account. My most favorite project I worked on in my entire career, still, I'll just say to date, because I'm kind of excited about some of the ones I'm working on right now, in case any of my clients are listening. My favorite project was the Portland General Electric Boardman Power Station torrefied biomass test, where we took a 600 megawatt coal power plant and over a series of a year and a half of work, converted it to run purely on wood pellets. It would run sustainably on routine forestry operations year on year. And we solved every technical challenge. And there were so many technical challenges that came up that were completely unexpected. But the plant and my team, we were all working together like a family, really. Every challenge we met, we worked together, we overcame it, and at the end of the day, on the last test day, the plant hummed along on 100% renewable energy, and I remember staring out at the lights blinking in the distance of the town of Boardman and all the surrounding communities out of the power plant window with the lead engineer next to me, Randy, and I just said, just think about this. All those lights out there right now are powered by renewable energy from your plant. Isn't that incredible? So think about all the challenges we overcame, all the first of a kind work we did, everyone coming together, and we made it work. So this, my friend, is engineering. This is the heart, the soul, the spirit of what engineering is all about.
You make me proud to be an engineer. I'm glad you went back to talk about bioenergy, because I was going to ask you more about what that was like. And thanks for the insight into kind of some of what you're working on and what you're excited about. But we're going to transition. You were just talking about this is engineering. It's facing challenges, solving problems, and then seeing the solutions. And so let's talk about that from the broad industry perspective of decarbonization and shifting toward renewables. What do you think is the biggest challenge or roadblock standing between us as a society right now and the new clean energy economy?
I think politics. I think there is a tremendous political divide that has heavily invested itself in two opposing camps that do not want to come together in the middle and work with each other. And regardless of where you lie upon that spectrum politically, I think that is recognized as the big problem, the problem that we will stagnate, that one side says all this way or nothing, the other side says all this way or nothing. And that sense of compromise, of working together at meeting in the middle, is going to end up in stalemate. And I think that is the problem there at heart, is that there is such a reluctance to come together for the common good. And I am afraid I don't see a good solution to that, that both sides of the political spectrum are so heavily invested in their own narrative and their own positions that they've staked out on, that who will be that person who reaches across the aisle, so to speak, or those people, and say, look, let's really come together and find something in the middle, or find some way to advance the struggle, because we know there are different ways that we can approach this and different ways that both sides' goals can be fulfilled if we can just talk to each other and work. But I just, never in my life, mind you, I'm just barely 53, so maybe not that old compared to some of your listeners, but I've never seen such a dichotomy, politically speaking, in our society. And I think that's not just going to impact the green economy, but it's going to impact everything. And until we can just work with each other and find those, I think I'm kind of repeating myself here, actually.
No worries. Well, I think it actually, I think that relates back to something you said at the very beginning, when we were initially talking about centralization versus decentralization. Like, that's a dichotomy. Those are two ends of a false binary, right? That, like, and they can almost be sort of represented by these two political sides, that, like, you have a one side that says, centralized energy forever, and we are staying on fossil fuels, and that's an established economy that's stable and reliable. And then there's another side that says, no, rip it all out. We need to start over. And, and in the reality, which is what you said in the beginning, from a technical perspective, in reality, we need to have a more graceful transition. There is going to be fossil fuels in our future for a while, for a long time, as we make a transition to provide reliability and stability like that. And there's no saying that doesn't work with a layer of renewables that gets maybe larger, more distributed. And just the same way, because I work on microgrids behind the meter, I tend to come out strongly on the side of distributed energy. But I have to watch that. I have to check that and be careful that, like, distributed energy is not the only solution, certainly not in the near future while we make a transition. And so I wonder, is the way through the political divide partly about weaving the graceful transition from the technical standpoint? Of course, as an engineer, and we're both engineers, but as an engineer, I always think that the problem can be solved with more data and better tech. And that isn't always the case. Sometimes it really has to be solved, like, on the floor at Capitol Hill. And that's where the solution has to begin. So I don't know. What's your take?
Well, I think you bring up an excellent point, and there's external factors that in some way are tech-related, but not that drive things. What has resulted in the closure of more coal plants in the U.S. than any legislative effort at all is fracking and the availability of cheap natural gas. So that's something that transcends the political side at first, until fracking then became a bad word. But you can't get rid of fracking, because then you reduce our gas reserves by 90-some%. And then where does your energy come from? Well, we can't build new nuclear plants. Renewables are rolling out as fast as they can, but there's still the problem of storage. And ironically, we find situations where we're falling back on coal again. And so there are technical solutions that could revolutionize things. What if, after hearing for the last 50 years that fusion energy is just 20 years away, what if next week there's an announcement of a breakthrough in fusion? Somebody actually ends up making a fusion plant that can become viable in the next 5 to 10 years. What if there is a revolution in energy storage capability, for instance, that really benefits both microgrids but centralized energy production as well? What if, in laboratories we can make very efficient solar cells, but that doesn't translate that well out to real life. And so what if we could double the efficiency of solar? There's so many things that could happen that could really drive us towards a decarbonized future that fall outside of politics. And there's also things that could drive us the other direction, back towards a recarbonized future, a major catastrophe, a war of some sort. There's a lot of things that could occur that could actually put us in a worse position.
So I'm a big fan of when we talk about these like big sweeping challenges and all the things standing in our way. I'm a really big fan of, finding what's the next right thing that we could do. And so I'm going to frame this question, from your perspective, from your chair. What are the most important first steps, the next right things that we could be doing as an industry to either solve the challenges we've just talked about or just to move forward in general?
Have some hope. And that sounds really, I think that sounds really vague. Take some hope and combine it with passion and apply our skills to really come together and tackle these technical challenges and find a way from the engineering side of things, find a way to make the solutions so palatable, so unavoidably and simply the right thing to do that they just happen. That find a way to be smarter, to develop new technology. That sounds really vague and nebulous, though. It's like go forth and make everything better, young woman. But that's not really what I'm saying. I'm saying that when I work directly with a lot of people at power stations across the U.S. as well as the world, but let's focus on the U.S. for now. And it may be because of the way that I talk to them, the way I communicate, the fact that they know that I will hold confidences. There's a lot of despair out there. There's a lot of despair at the plant level of people that say they just don't know what to do. They don't know if their plant's going to stay alive or not. They don't want to make the plant better because why bother? It'll be shut down in 2 or 3 years. Why make this small efficiency improvement that'll pay for itself in a couple months? Because it's just all going to go away. Why bother to spend the energy to keep trying to be better? Why bother to transition to gas at a coal plant, which will immediately, even though there are some efficiency losses, at the net amount of CO2 released is cut by about 32 to 35%. That's a major improvement right there, let alone all the other pollutants that are reduced. But there seems to be a lack of hope, and it seems almost like the great division in politics, or even it's turning into a general ennui or melancholia, so to speak, for lack of a better word, to want to do better at the plants. Young engineers are also, they seem to be less interested in entering the power industry. it doesn't seem as fascinating to them. It seems like old tech. Why would I want to go and work on fossil plants to make them better? That's old tech. We can't all be solar panel engineers, and there's a lot of improvement that can be made. I teach these engineering students and I ask them, the ones that want to be in the energy industry, what do you want to work on? Everybody wants to work on the absolute newest and best technology, but there's so much more that needs to be done. And in some cases, there's a lot of low-hanging fruit in the old technology. And we have to be inventive about looking at problems and stop falling back on the same old, same old. We have to, like I said, we have to bring a combination of hope and passion back, that we can find a way. I can't solve the bigger political picture and political divide between the two sides. I don't have that capability, but I can work my best to put my passion into my solution and present it to the utilities, the owners, the generators out there, and say, there is a lot of good that you can do with this. This path is really going to help you out. This is going to make everything better for everyone. I mean, in a capitalist society, yes, it's hard to sell a solution that ends up making your plant more expensive to run, especially because you may not be able to run it. It's like, that's great, you made our plant 10% more efficient, but it had to shut down because it couldn't run. So how do you work with that? I am convinced one aspect of the move to the demand side, though, is very critical, and that is reducing our consumption. Our energy is so cheap. My neighbor, I'm not going to say which one, but one of my neighbors has a 100-watt light bulb that burns 24/7 in the back of their house. During the daytime, it's on, burning constantly, year-round, and when it burns out, he goes out and replaces it. And I asked him, don't you have a switch for that? Yeah. Why is it 1 p.m. in July and you have a 100-watt bulb going full blast? So I don't know. That way I won't forget to turn it off at night. I won't forget to turn it on at night. Well, you mean you just can't? And I think about it, it's like, it's only 100 watts. But then I go around at night and I see so many houses lit like Christmas trees practically. I see so much wasted energy through poor building standards, and I see so much I just see so much inefficiency. It just makes me almost just twitching, like I want to help. I want to stop in the car right there and say, here, let me help you with your house to be more efficient. I have people that have programmable thermostats where the programmable mode, the setback mode, is turned off. Why? Because they don't know. They don't understand about the potential energy savings that they have. The first time when we first put in our programmable thermostat here, I tracked it and then scaled it by the degree day difference compared to past years so I could find out the true amount we saved. We saved 40% on our cooling bill and something like 30% on our heating bill as a result from a $79 piece of equipment. And I think from the demand side, we have to be quite a bit smarter. Look at the battle against LED lighting. I mean,
well, I was going to suggest that for your neighbor. Like, can we buy him an LED light bulb? Like,
yeah, that's he's very set in his ways, and I don't know if I want to even really suggest anything. Plus, to be blunt, there is a bit of sexism. It's like this kind of is handyman type stuff.
Oh, sure.
Like, you do realize I am actually a professor of engineering.
Yeah.
It's like I work in the power industry, but it doesn't matter. And I can speak to friends about how they should put their thermostat in programmable mode, and but it'll just work harder trying to come up to temperature. And I try to explain them, no, that's not how your heat pump or furnace works. And they just blink at me and say, well, anyways, where are we going to go for dinner? And
right. Well, I really love your summary, though, of hope and passion. I was going to say heat and passion. No, it's not a heat pump. Hope and passion, because I do think that kind of
perhaps we need a hope pump.
Maybe we do. No, it's easy to, we feel there are a lot of people, I think, that aren't scared enough about what's happening to our planet. And so we try to tell them, and that gets scary. And then it tends to like sap the hope, out of it. But I think keeping the hope, keeping the faith that we solve these, smaller problems incrementally, one at a time, and that we are making a difference every time we can get a win for a residence or a commercial property or a utility or in policy. Every win we get gets us closer. And so I think that spoke to me today, that that hope is the key, and then to channel passion behind that hope. And that is non-technical, but I think that's the motivating driving force behind all of it.
I think that's true. And I think that's what I try most in my classes that I teach. I teach 2 classes that are really one at the university. Is with every topic, I try to get the class enthused about solving the problem. Enthusiasm can carry you a tremendous distance. Ultimately, you need the learning, you need the experience, you need the knowledge, and the raw brain power at times. But the will to make a positive change can make such a difference in whether you at least even try. And that's why I think that's why when you ask me, what is really the solution to breaking the logjam that's slowing or possibly stopping the path to a more clean future, decarbonized future, whatever you want to call it, I can't answer the bigger questions. But on an individual basis, I'm trying to infuse people with the passion to try and to feel strongly that these are important things that we need to address, and that we need to find ways to compromise. We need to keep our eyes on the prize, to paraphrase, I think, Dr. King, and advance the struggle. It can't be revolutionary. It cannot be, it's not going to be a flip of a switch. I tell, this is actually very similar to a real life situation. Sierra Club could go to a coal plant and say, hey, shut down now. And the plant will say, well, we can't. There's grid stability issues. We don't have power for this region. There would be brownouts. There's this problem. And we don't care. Shut down now. And of course, that's not going to do anything. And I go to the plant and I say, you can't shut down now. But what if you could utilize 25% gas co-firing, which would reduce all of your emissions by roughly 25%, and reduce your greenhouse gas impact by about 15%. And looking at the pricing structure in your area, it might save you some money too. Wouldn't that be interesting? So, yeah, the plant's still there, and yes, it's still polluting, but it's better. And we've advanced the struggle one step further. And then 5 years later, maybe we'd add some bioenergy into the mix. Or maybe by then, the grid, whether that's on the macro level or by use of microgrid technology, by then everything else is caught up and the plant can just shut down. But again, even in the environmental movement, and I do consider myself very strongly to be an environmentalist, which surprises a lot of people, but I don't work on projects that make the environment dirtier. At the end of the day, the project has to have a net improvement to the environment, or I simply won't work on it. It doesn't matter how much money they offer me. And that's the way my company feels too. We are about making the environment better at the end of the day as part of the overall big picture for the project we're tackling. And I think shift the focus from revolution, shift it to evolution, shift the focus from who wins the battle to cooperation. Then thus that will help lead to shifting the focus from despair to hope, and will shift the focus from ennui, melancholia, whatever adjective you want to refer to it by, to feeling good about what you do and feeling happy engineering in a way. Oh my goodness, I hope that doesn't become some slogan I've known by.
It's beautiful. I say yes to all of that. Well, it has been an absolute pleasure to have this conversation with you. Thank you so much for your time coming on the show. If our listeners want to get in touch with you, what's the best way to do that?
My personal mail is just it's Una, that's UNA NOWLING@gmail.com. It's basically my first name last name is the best way. And I try to respond to messages. I get about 200 new mails a day, and sometimes it's hard because I put a lot into my work, and it's hard to catch up. I think I've got 1,300 unread emails right now, but I do try.
Well, hey, did you also want to give a shout out to your radio shows? What are their names? Can they be found online?
Yes, it can. The shows I produce are at 90.1 FM, KKFI, Kansas City Community Radio, which can be found at kkfi.org. And the first show that I co-produce with my spouse, Fiona, and our very dear friend, Rachel Cady, is called The 10th Voice, which is an LGBTQIA plus activism program that has actually been on the air for about 30 years continuously. I think we may be the oldest or one of the oldest 100,000 watt radio programs in that subject matter. And then just 2 hours after that, 1 hour after that, we the same three of us co-produce Every Woman, which is a show about uplifting topics to benefit women, focusing on special or unique women that have done something interesting or cool or just something that will give enthusiasm and ideas to our listeners on how they can, transcend oppression in a way, but not just at the national level, but also at the local level. And really also the men that support the movement, as well as non-binary, non-gender conforming persons, and how they link into the whole spectrum as well.
Well, awesome. Listeners, I hope you check out Una's radio shows for more from her. Thank you once again for being here on the podcast. It's been an incredible conversation, and looking forward to more. So
thank you very much for having me, Amy.
Absolutely. And listeners, thank you for joining us. We thank you for your time today, and we'll see you next time here at the Whiteboard.
Thanks for joining us for another episode of the Power Flow podcast. If you enjoyed the conversation, please share the episode with other innovators, leave us a positive review, and subscribe to Power Flow on Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen to podcasts. You can find show notes for this episode, more great conversations, Power Flow merchandise, and more at powerflowpodcast.com. Power Flow is hosted by Amy Simpkins, produced by Devin Shonchek, and managed by Laura Novak. See you next time here at the Whiteboard.